There is always a moment before everything changes. A glance that lingers half a second longer than it should. A silence that feels heavier than normal silence. Nothing inappropriate has happened. No vows have been broken. And yet something invisible has shifted between two people. It does not begin in a bedroom. It begins in attention. In curiosity disguised as politeness. In a harmless question that lingers in memory. The brain registers the spark long before morality does. And that is where the real danger lives. Why would someone risk years of shared history? Why gamble stability for uncertainty? On the surface, it looks irrational, self-destructive, even foolish. But the human mind does not run purely on logic. It runs on emotion, novelty, and unmet hunger. The answer is rarely just lust. It is the desire to feel alive again. To feel chosen again. To feel seen without history attached. When life becomes predictable, the soul begins to suffocate quietly. And strangers often feel like fresh oxygen. Marriage brings comfort. Comfort becomes routine. Routine becomes repetition. And repetition slowly dulls emotional intensity. The brain, however, is wired for stimulation. And stimulation often hides inside the unknown. A stranger carries mystery. Mystery carries possibility. Possibility activates dopamine inside the brain. Dopamine does not ask about loyalty. It does not care about contracts. It only demands continuation. Neuroscience shows that uncertainty excites us more than certainty. The predictable becomes background noise. The unfamiliar becomes foreground stimulation. A spouse becomes known territory. A stranger becomes unexplored land. And humans have always been wired to explore. But this is not always about replacing love. It is often about escaping identity. In long-term relationships, roles harden over time. You become predictable in how you are seen, defined by past mistakes and routines. A stranger offers a blank page. A stranger does not know your worst chapters. They do not remember your arguments. They do not associate you with bills or stress. They see fragments of your best self. And fragments can feel more beautiful than the whole truth. And this is where the hook tightens. You are not falling for the stranger. You are falling for your reflection in their eyes. The version of yourself that feels lighter, younger, unburdened. And that illusion can be dangerously intoxicating. The brain is not designed for lifelong sameness. It is designed for survival through stimulation. Novelty signals opportunity. Opportunity signals reward. And reward releases dopamine. The same chemical that fuels addiction. Dopamine does not measure morality. It measures anticipation. The unknown activates it more powerfully than the known. A text message not yet opened can feel more exciting than a predictable goodnight kiss. Uncertainty becomes intoxicating. And the mind begins to chase it. This is called novelty bias. The tendency to overvalue what is new simply because it is new. The stranger becomes amplified. Their words feel sharper. Their presence feels brighter. Not because they are better, but because they are unfamiliar. Over time, familiarity lowers emotional intensity. Predictability stabilizes love but reduces thrill. The brain adapts to constant exposure. What once felt electric becomes normal. And normal feels quiet. But the stranger resets the scale. Suddenly your laugh feels noticed again. Your stories feel interesting again. Your presence feels magnetic again. This is not love. It is contrast. There is another force at play. Identity reinvention. In long relationships, identity becomes fixed. Your flaws are cataloged. Your habits memorized. Your narrative completed. But a stranger does not hold your archive. They meet you without context. You can edit your introduction. You can highlight strengths. You can hide the cracks. Reinvention feels powerful. This is why conversations feel addictive. Each interaction becomes a performance. Each response carefully curated. You are not just speaking. You are crafting a new version of yourself. Then come the micro-validations. A compliment about your mind. A message that says, I understand you. A subtle expression of admiration. Small moments. But emotionally loud. These are tiny dopamine deposits. Harmless in isolation. Dangerous in repetition. Because the brain begins to associate that person with elevation. And elevation becomes attachment. At first, it feels harmless. Just conversation. Just attention. Just connection. No physical lines crossed. No visible damage done. That is how it justifies itself. The mind begins its quiet negotiation. It's only talking. It means nothing. I deserve this. Small rationalizations stack like bricks. And soon they build a private world. Secrecy intensifies emotion. Hidden conversations feel heavier. Forbidden interactions feel amplified. Risk sharpens desire. The brain confuses danger with depth. Emotional intimacy grows quietly. You begin sharing frustrations. Private disappointments. Things you no longer say at home. Vulnerability builds attachment faster than touch ever could. And here is the turning point. The stranger becomes your emotional refuge. When something good happens, you want to tell them first. When something hurts, you seek their comfort. Emotional priority begins to shift. This is how emotional affairs begin. Not with lust, but with displacement. The stranger slowly occupies space once reserved for your partner. And the shift feels almost invisible. The brain now associates this person with relief, with excitement, with elevation. Their presence becomes a shortcut to feeling alive. And shortcuts are addictive. Meanwhile, home feels heavier. Responsibilities feel louder. Routine feels duller. The contrast widens. And contrast distorts perception. The stranger is still a projection. Still incomplete. Still curated. But the mind fills in missing pieces with fantasy. And fantasy is always flawless. This is the illusion's peak. You believe you've found someone extraordinary. But what you've actually found is contrast. Amplified by secrecy. And sustained by imagination. There comes a moment when the line blurs. The conversations become more personal. The pauses become more charged. Silence begins to say more than words. And you feel it. Something is no longer innocent. Conscience whispers first. Soft. Subtle. Easy to ignore. But desire speaks louder. And it speaks in emotion, not logic. Emotion is harder to silence. You begin hiding small things. Deleting messages. Locking screens. Tilting your phone away. Secrecy becomes routine. And routine makes deception feel normal. The thrill intensifies because it is forbidden. Risk sharpens perception. Your heartbeat quickens at simple notifications. And danger begins to feel romantic. You tell yourself it's temporary. Just a phase. Just curiosity. But emotional attachment does not announce itself. It builds quietly. Like cracks beneath the surface of ice. Meanwhile, your partner senses something. A subtle shift in energy. A distance in your eyes. Conversations feel shorter. Eye contact feels different. Something unspoken hangs in the air. The internal conflict begins. Guilt collides with excitement. Stability clashes with intensity. You feel divided inside your own mind. And division creates pressure. At this stage, reality starts bending. You compare your partner unfairly. You magnify their flaws. You minimize their strengths. And you exaggerate the stranger's perfection. Projection replaces perception. You are no longer seeing the stranger clearly. You are seeing your fantasy reflected back at you. And fantasy rarely survives exposure. This is the breaking point. Not when bodies touch. But when loyalty fractures internally. Because once the mind shifts, the heart often follows. There is a moment when you realize it has gone too far. Not because of what you did. But because of what you feel. The stranger now occupies mental space without effort. They appear in quiet moments. And that is when you know something has shifted permanently. You begin comparing without meaning to. Their voice feels softer. Their attention feels sharper. Their presence feels lighter. The comparison is unfair. But it happens automatically. Emotional priority quietly rearranges itself. You check your phone hoping it is them. You replay conversations in your mind. You anticipate their replies. And anticipation becomes attachment. Meanwhile, home feels slightly dimmer. Conversations feel routine. Familiarity feels heavy. You are not dissatisfied. But you are distracted. And distraction erodes presence. This is how detachment begins. Not with anger. Not with hatred. But with drift. A slow emotional migration from one person to another. Quiet. Gradual. Almost invisible. The illusion strengthens because reality has not yet tested it. The stranger still exists in fragments. Only curated moments. No conflict. No friction. No responsibility. You begin imagining alternative futures. Small daydreams. Harmless scenarios. What if becomes a quiet companion. And imagination deepens emotional investment. The mind now rewrites history. You exaggerate problems at home. You downplay good memories. You reshape the narrative to justify your feelings. This is cognitive distortion at work. At this stage, the emotional affair is real. Even if no one else sees it. Loyalty has already fractured internally. And once fractured, it is difficult to restore fully. And here lies the paradox. You feel more alive than you have in years. Yet more unstable than ever before. Excitement and guilt now coexist. And the mind begins to prepare for consequence. Reality begins its quiet knock. A glance at home feels heavier. A message notification feels louder. You notice the weight of lies pressing down subtly. And pressure builds without announcement. Small moments trigger disproportionate emotion. A missed reply feels like rejection. A delayed text feels like abandonment. And the mind interprets these tiny ripples as catastrophe. Meanwhile, home feels emptier. Conversations feel rehearsed. Touches feel routine. You begin avoiding certain topics. And avoidance deepens emotional distance. Guilt begins to seep in. Quiet, gnawing. You try to justify. You rationalize. But conscience whispers too often to be fully ignored. Emotional exposure grows dangerous. What once felt private now shapes every decision. You plan moments around potential interaction. Your mood rises and falls with their attention. The illusion begins to crack. Subtle inconsistencies appear. Moments that should feel perfect feel hollow. And your mind struggles to reconcile reality with fantasy. Cognitive dissonance intensifies. You know something is wrong, yet you crave it more. Logic and desire are at war. And the tension becomes unbearable. Friendships notice change. Small cues. Absences. Distraction. Lies start to ripple outward, touching corners of life previously untouched. Every interaction carries weight. Every glance matters. Every word becomes a test. And the mind now calculates constantly, balancing thrill against guilt. And still, the pull remains. The stranger continues to dominate thoughts. Home feels distant. Stability feels muted. And the illusion maintains its grip despite consequences. Every choice now carries invisible weight. A smile feels guilty. A laugh feels stolen. Even silence is charged. You cannot escape the mental tally of attention and deception. Conversations become calculated. Every word measured. Every phrase designed to excite or conceal. You are no longer yourself, but a performer in a private play. Your partner senses it. Not in words, but in the air. Energy shifts. Unspoken questions linger. Emotional distance widens imperceptibly. Friendships begin noticing. Absences. Short replies. Distraction. Secrecy leaks outward like faint cracks in a wall. Small conflicts feel larger. Minor misunderstandings feel like battles. Emotional fragility grows. And you struggle to reconcile fantasy with responsibility. You begin to anticipate the stranger's reactions. Your mood rises with attention. Your mood falls with silence. And your stability becomes hostage to fleeting signals. Emotional energy is no longer linear. Highs and lows cascade unpredictably. Small interactions trigger disproportionate responses. And the mind begins to chase the next emotional surge. The illusion tightens its grip. Every positive interaction reinforces attachment. Every absence heightens anxiety. Emotional dependency grows silently. You rationalize the tension away. It's harmless. It's temporary. It's only thoughts. But rationalization cannot erase the emotional footprint left behind. And still, the pull persists. The stranger occupies thought, attention, and emotion. Home feels quieter, stability duller. And the mind struggles to resist the fantasy it has built. A quiet moment alone triggers reflection. You notice how often your thoughts drift. You realize the stranger occupies mental space once reserved for love, trust, and stability. Anxiety and guilt intertwine subtly. And your heart feels heavier. Doubts begin surfacing. Is this right? Am I betraying trust? The questions are whispered internally, quiet yet relentless. And the mind struggles to answer. You recall promises, memories, and shared history. A pang of guilt strikes, soft but insistent. and the contrast between fantasy and reality grows more apparent. Yet the pull persists. Desire and attachment continue to dominate thought. Even awareness of risk cannot fully sever the emotional tether. Emotional conflict escalates. You oscillate between longing and guilt, thrill and shame. The internal struggle becomes exhausting. And self-reflection grows urgent. Small reminders of home feel sharper. A partner's words echo longer. Familiar routines feel loaded. And you realize how far your mind has wandered. You catch yourself replaying interactions with the stranger. You dissect every word, every gesture, every smile. And the mind starts questioning why it feels so irreplaceable. Self-deception surfaces. You justify thoughts with, "It's harmless. It's only emotional." But deep down, you know the illusion has a cost. The first hint of consequence appears. You notice subtle changes in behavior. Friends, family, even your own sense of self begin responding differently. And yet, despite awareness, the emotional grip remains. Fantasy fights reality. Thrill clashes with conscience. And the mind braces for the inevitable collision. Reality creeps in quietly. A partner notices subtle changes. A friend asks an awkward question. Each small observation feels like exposure. Anxiety rises in silence. The illusion begins to wobble. Minor inconsistencies appear in interactions with the stranger. Messages arrive late, replies feel flat. And the mind starts questioning what was curated. Guilt grows sharper. Not sudden, but persistent. Memories of home, promises, and trust intrude on fantasy. You cannot fully enjoy the thrill without pangs of shame. Emotional tension escalates. Desire conflicts with responsibility. Thrill clashes with conscience. Every thought of the stranger now carries the weight of consequence. Small confrontations arise internally. Questions like, "What am I doing?" echo repeatedly. Rationalizations weaken. Emotional reality asserts itself. Everyday life begins to fracture. Focus wanes at work, patience diminishes at home. The mind is divided between fantasy and obligation, and neither feels stable. Emotional dependency peaks. Every interaction with the stranger triggers intense reaction. You notice highs and lows magnifying with each message. Rational thought competes with emotional pull. You know the consequences. You know the risk. Yet the attachment persists, stronger than reason. Subtle exposure begins externally. Friends notice distraction. Family senses distance. Your internal fracture is becoming visible. And still, the pull of fantasy refuses release. Emotional thrill, guilt, and attachment intertwine. The mind braces for further fallout. The pull intensifies. You chase attention. Each message feels like a heartbeat. Every silence feels like punishment. Emotional dependency tightens its grip. Rational thought falters. Warnings from conscience feel distant. Desire becomes louder than reason. And your mind bends to emotion. Minor risks now feel exhilarating. The thrill of secrecy outweighs caution. You begin to enjoy the tension, even as guilt gnaws quietly. Emotional stakes rise. You notice how easily your mood swings. Joy and fear are now entangled. You are addicted to the oscillation. Home feels distant. Conversations feel like duty. Familiar touch feels routine. The illusion dominates thought more than reality. Rationalization intensifies. It's harmless. I'm only thinking. It's temporary. But rationalizations weaken under emotional intensity. You begin noticing external reactions. Friends look concerned. Family senses distance. Your internal fracture is now subtly visible in the real world. Anxiety and thrill intertwine. Every small interaction becomes weighted with significance. Emotional highs and lows intensify. The mind begins chasing the next surge. Every message, every glance, every word becomes a dopamine trigger. You are addicted to attention. And here is the point of no return. Fantasy has embedded itself into reality. Emotional attachment dominates. Conscience whispers, but action now follows desire. Consequences emerge subtly at first. A partner notices small absences. A friend senses distraction. The mind braces for exposure, yet clings to fantasy. Emotional highs now carry equal weight of guilt. Every thrill is mirrored by anxiety. Internal tension becomes almost unbearable. Small cracks appear in the illusion. Curated perfection begins to falter. Subtle inconsistencies grow impossible to ignore. Anxiety spills outward. Friends notice distraction, family senses distance. The mind cannot contain the fracture any longer. Conscience whispers louder. Guilt intensifies. You realize actions are leaving invisible scars on those you care about. Emotional collapse accelerates. Thrill and fear collide. Joy and shame coexist. The mind oscillates uncontrollably. Relationships fracture quietly. Words become sharper. Touches become mechanical. Trust erodes slowly, almost invisibly, yet irreversibly. Social exposure begins to appear. Friends ask questions. Family notices absence. The private fracture now becomes public. The mind struggles to reconcile reality and fantasy. Desire fights conscience, yet evidence of harm grows impossible to ignore. And still, the emotional grip holds. Fantasy dominates thought. Reality fights back. The mind braces for the final reckoning. The dust settles, but the mind remains restless. Emotional attachment leaves traces. The illusion is gone, but its residue lingers. Guilt, thrill, and regret coexist quietly. You reflect on choices made. Moments once thrilling now feel heavy. Desire and conscience leave behind a complex tapestry of regret and insight. Relationships bear subtle scars. Trust weakened. Familiarity slightly fractured. Some connections may heal, others may never fully recover. Self-perception is altered. You see yourself differently now. Awareness of moral choice and consequence imprints deeply, haunting quietly yet persistently. The mind recalls fantasy and reality intertwined. Lessons linger. Emotional manipulation, desire, secrecy, and guilt are now fully understood from within. Philosophical insight emerges. Humans are susceptible to desire, secrecy, and forbidden allure. The mind's dark corridors reveal truths rarely spoken. The psychological footprint of choices becomes evident. Memories of thrill, secrecy, and attachment linger. And the mind reflects on the cost. Emotional scars remain invisible to others but deeply felt within. The mind learns, adapts, and remembers. And a haunting awareness settles. And finally, the haunting truth: desire can overpower reason, illusion can replace reality, and attachment can reshape the self quietly yet irreversibly. So we end here, with a question echoing in the mind: how far would your own mind drift if desire outweighed conscience? Reflect, comment, and confront your own shadows.